I think one of the tricky things has been, on like a given day, I think most of us might be unsure about what the material will be. And so, granted, every time that we've discussed something, it has been in the past. But I think it's easy, I think, if people have a lot of classes going on, you'll read something and then your focus will shift.
I can understand that also. The amount of reading is very small.
It is.
And that can encourage you to do it and forget it. Or it can encourage you to do it and redo it. And my thought is on the second side. So it's not, in a sense, as long as we're not ahead of the game. So, I'm going to talk about something, hey, it's not, you haven't been supposed to read it yet. That would seem like you shouldn't be expected to have it in mind. But I think on the broad, so, you're reading overlapping things. Right? One is the symposium or whatever, and then there are papers of mine that deal with it. And the goal is to get you to read more deeply and have more questions, and then to come with the questions and talk about it some more. But if that's not congenial to you, that's not the end of the world, right? There are all sorts of other ways to arrange discussions so that you don't have that. But I do understand. And one of the things you're going to ask me, too, you're going to send me. So I don't know what I'm supposed to be reading. So it's true that the syllabus, for me anyway, is kind of like a rough guide because you never quite, I don't like to just hop on because now the syllabus tells me that I should. So it does require you to be more proactive and thinking that way. Any other, yes, you have a thought.
Yeah, mine's related. It's just that, I'm always doing reading, and I find it very interesting, but our class discussion will sometimes focus a lot on the reading, and sometimes, not at all. So, even if I have questions related to the reading, we go off on really, really interesting other tangents that are related and founded in the text, but not strictly about it. So, it's not, a lack of interest.
I see. Okay. So, and by the way, it's the line of discussion isn't normative, right? You can say, so in this bit of the reading that we were supposed to do, here's a question related to this. That's fine. The main road, the road isn't a kind of super highway. We take lots of side routes, and sometimes it's just the ones that seem to me on the day to be worth exploring a bit, and then to see how you respond to the explorations. But we can always redirect ourselves. You should feel you can do that, right, if you want. But I understand that. So we're taking temperatures to see how we're all feeling about the class, because we don't want to go on doing something that's not fun, when we could be doing something that is fun. So, any other comments?
It would be interesting to see where these things go, or this is a very old text and there's a lot of developments out of it. And as far as discussion, for me it's for me to get the entirety of something just from reading it myself, and it's good to read I don't know, the best people's responses. The part, I don't know, an example that maybe you could recommend outside reading that's not necessarily assigned to be carefully gotten over, but just for us to have in our minds. When she talks, Diotima talks about poiesis, for example. Diotima talks about poiesis, for example, which Heidegger wrote a very long essay. And I know I haven't read it, but I know there's in one of the seminars Lacan does a reading of the symposium. That kind of thing would be interesting.
I think it might interest you, right? And I think so. There are different styles of approach. So some people read out, and some people read in, right? So one of the things you can think is the symposium and all of the various reactions. That's the history of the thought about love in the West, right? So you can spend the rest of your life on it. That's huge, right? So you're right. Especially we looked at the influence of these images in art and other places, enormous set of influences. But I think that's not my style, particularly. I like to read in. So my thought is, what does it actually say? How are we to understand it? What sense can we make of it for ourselves, as opposed to making sense of it together with other people's attempts to make sense of it? So the one person whose attempts to make sense of it you get in mind, right? So I've written a lot But there's some secondary material in the footnotes and others that if you're, or if you say, hey, you know, I'm really interested in this and I want to read some more about it, you can ask me and I will tell you. But I don't like, so some courses, and I think this is especially true in literature courses, history courses, right, where you're assigned a huge amount of readings. You might have to read a novel a week, right, or something like that. And in philosophy, that approach seems to me not to work very well, in part because I think it encourages a style of thinking about it that isn't the best kind. You really want to get to be able to see in detail why these moves are made. And sometimes it helps you to see various attempts to say what they are. But when you look at somebody like Heidegger, for example, or indeed any other great philosopher, Hegel, anyone who's reading these texts, who's himself or herself a great philosopher, what you get is Heidegger, right? So Heidegger thinks essentially all of history, philosophy led up to me. Let me tell you, and Hegel thought the same thing. The Germans like to think that kind of thing. I'm the end of it, so let me tell you, right, let me tell you what this means, because now I've got a determinative line. The Anglo-American approach is far more about developing certain kinds of skills, abilities, and analytic capacities to be able to think quite generally about this, so that when you think about love for yourself, but without necessarily buying into some theory, right, you are in a good position to think about it. So, and those are all you could do all of those things. They're not alternatives. They're, they're compatible approaches. Any other thoughts, reactions? Yeah. That looked like you were going to be the one, yeah.
I was thinking about this more,
yeah,
like several lectures ago when we would go down a tangent for a long time. I think all these were really good. But another thing that would relate back to this like original text is if we're able to go into it with a particular question.
Yeah.
I think that makes it easier to sort of notice like something deeper. So for example, since we've started the symposium, it's become clear, we should be looking at this not just in the sense of here are these things that people say, but as a whole, where there's an emphasis on the sort of aesthetics of the whole thing and the sort of dialogue that happens, and then when Alcibiades comes and says all these things, then that makes a different part. And I think like we've had ample time to like realize that that's the direction and then go back. So I don't think it's entirely like something you're not doing, but I think maybe going forward, if there's something that you're particularly interested in or like have an interest in, if you can set that up beforehand, I think it'd be helpful.
Well, I think that my approach is twofold, right? One is I think of what's it like to be reading these things for the first time without a picture of what the whole is. So you have one kind of experience that way. And then another kind of experience when you start to try to put the whole lot of it together. And so some of the readings are intended to give a kind of overview, to take you through connecting up some dots, right? But the class, this is what I want to think, the class is not so much about the symposium as it is about the ideas about love that we can create by sort of rubbing two sticks together, right? We're trying to give ourselves intuition pumps, idea pumps, argument pumps, right? Things that can get us to kind of waking us up a bit about thinking about it without necessarily sort of thinking that the symposium dictates everything that we have to do and we can't think about anything else. And one of the reasons to select texts like the symposium or the Phaedrus, apart from the fact that I know a lot about them, is that they do this. So when we think about love these days, we tend to narrow down our focus. And when you read the symposium, you realize that actually, when you do that, you're making a cut into a much more complicated array. And that you need to look at a bigger picture than than the one that you were thinking of. But and you look, you can do this. You can prompt me to say, okay, so where are we going, right? Or where have we been, or what are we going? And some of that I'll answer, and some of it I won't, right? Because part of it is, as Socrates says, it's itself teaching, I think, and learning too, probably, are themselves erotic activities. They're about the creation of desire. They're not about feeding you information. If I wanted to do that, I'd just write you up pages of shit and give it to you to read, and then examine you on it every day, right, to make sure that you're, able to regurgitate it. A different approach, and it's certainly mine, is the kind of inspirational, try to get you turned on to something, make you want to know something, see that you don't know some things. And that can fail like every other seduction, right? You try it, but it doesn't work. It leaves the other person cold. It's not the right strategy. And what I want to make sure is that I don't think I'll ever get everyone. That's too much. But I would hate to be losing nearly everyone. So I want to make sure that you're engaged enough, right? I think the other one, I haven't asked you, but I assume that you've looked at the films by now, and that you started thinking about them, and that those should be helping. I mean, the stuff that we're talking about is directly relevant to the films, but it's not relevant in kind of an easy, like step, here, the books discuss the films, or right, something like that. It's not like that. But I think that if you are doing that, then ideas should be coming. And I think we should be feeling free-ranging, right, about these, and be able to go where we want to. Any other thoughts? Should I be thinking to change my modus operandi or persisting?
Persist.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it might be helpful to have sort of like a unifying theme. This is sort of like echoing what Lillian said. Just like about, not necessarily like something that we all have to adhere to, but something that can sort of like thread all of the tangents that we go off on. Like I've been like reviewing my notes and not really understanding the threads of them. Some of them are more intelligible than others. And I think like the symposium like did serve to do some of that, but it's also partially on us to find those threads.
Well, I think that's right. I think that the unifying topic is love, but but it's a polymorphous notion, and so you can take it in a whole lot of different directions, and sometimes the threads, right, aren't. Let me put it this way: wanting to have too much of that kind of overarching structure seems to me to be false to the phenomenon, right? Why? Well, it's in part as if what you thought was, like, it could go like this. There's this country called love, and it's got, nice firm boundaries, and when you go there, you know where you are, it's like an island, right? And I think that it's not like that. I think that it's more like if somebody said, draw a map of Germany. It's quite difficult to do, right? Because just where the outlines of Germany, unlike the outlines of Ireland or something like that, right? It's very hard to know where they are. And part of the thought is you want to get a kind of comfort with a sort of insecurity about these questions. So one kind of comfort comes from thinking that you know and you've got a whole. You see that in all of Socrates' interlocutors. They all start out with a kind of confidence. And then Socrates works on them for a while. And then they lose their confidence, right? And that's a disturbing thing to have happen to you. But it's part of what I think you need to have happen if you're able to think creatively and effectively about something like love. You have to get used to the idea that your own confidence and your own sense of what you know is one of the things that enters into the play, right? That you are being forced to give up, right, or to put into question things that you know, feel confident about. So that's part of it. So I think there is, put it this way, I don't know what the overall. So when I wrote Love's Confusions, people say, oh, you've written a book about love. Well, tell me what it is. And I'd say, well, it's called Love's Confusions. Right? I mean, so the thought is not that love, right, that love provides us with this sort of country that we can easily see the contours of. It's rather that it's itself a source of a kind of confused life that we're trying to understand, both by clarifying, but also by understanding why and what the sources of confusion are. So that's a harder one, right? And part of that is that our own, you know, we are little nodes in a vast net of sources of information, erotic authorities, as I call them, that claim to tell us the truth about love. And our task is to see what those authorities are telling us and how we should respond to them. So I know, I understand wanting clarity is a good thing, but clarity can itself be a form of obscurity. It can be a way of making things seem clearer than they are. Yeah.
If I may turn the question back on you a little bit.
Yeah.
Now that you've expanded upon, like, you know, I guess not wanting too much structure, too much defined thing per class. Because I've been thinking about the discussion we're having, and like under the guidelines of not talking about one particular topic too much, I feel like we've been moving through a lot of different subject areas. I'm sure. What do you kind of want or expect from us that's not being provided?
Well, I think that good boy. No, it's not. No, it's not quite. So the one area of disappointment, as I called it, was simply how much of the reading you're able to respond with. The rest is fine. I think the discussions have been very good. I'm, in general, pretty happy with the way I feel in the class. So, it's not as if like, oh man, what a drag. It's just rather that I want to make sure that it's not like this, right? That, it's fun to come and talk, but actually we don't like doing the reading and it's kind of boring to us, right? And if that were true, then we'd think, okay, so let's read something else. Okay. Yeah. Was that a little hand?
No.
Yeah, it wasn't.
No.
Tell me how you feel. You don't say much. You've said a few things, but...
I mean, I enjoy the readings. It's sometimes they're a little bit like, I guess for me, like, I get a little bit bored sometimes, but I generally do enjoy reading. That's all I'm going to say.
All right. Well, let's go. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I don't know if anyone else feels the same way, but for me, having this, paper, like on one hand, I'm very interested by the prompt and excited to write it, but then at the same time, like, I'm used to going into all my papers knowing what I'm going to say and knowing that it's more or less correct. And so that sense of insecurity about, do any of us know what love is or what it is to be loved for ourselves? Like, I feel like probably, incorrectly, I'm somewhat constantly sort of being like, okay, how does this answer the prompt? Like, how does it feed back to it? And so I'm just trying to find clarity that may not exist.
Well, I think instead of thinking of clarity, think for a moment about a kind of resourcefulness. So think of something like this. That you won't be taken in by something, even if you're not sure what the truth is. So a different one, right, is not to be like Socratic interlocutors who are confident. I don't think confidence is what you need, but rather to be like the good interlocutor who can raise a good question, take it a few steps. That's very good. That's already a huge improvement, right? Where you can actually bore in a little bit, see that some things have been presupposed, question them, right? So that's a thought, right? It's not that you need to have that kind of security. It's, in a way, it's kind of a bogus thing, right? In mathematics, you can have it, right? You either prove the damn thing or you can't, right? And the answer's in the back of the book, so it'll tell you whether you're getting it right or not. But when you enter into a discussion like this, it's really more about how much you can bring out and bring to it. You don't have to come to it. You don't have to know what love is. It's enough to know that it's not that.
right? Or that this is problematic, or that, right, this is an aspect of it that seems to be presupposed as kind of determinative when really it isn't, right? And the two films are like that, right? They have clear pictures of what the background assumptions are about love that they're making, and finding out what those are, and then thinking, are those true? I mean, let me ask a few questions about them. That would be great. So you don't have to feel that. In fact, a certain amount of, think about it this way, okay? Think about going on a date, right? And you, with a new person, right? And you kind of like them, but you're not sure, how is it going to go? And there's a kind of insecurity and a kind of nervousness and a kind of, that's the attitude. That's the one you should have, right? It's the one in which you're trying to, something is interesting, right? You're trying to interact with it in a vivid, engaged way. You don't know where it's going to go. It might go badly. It might go well. But even the story about it's going badly could be a good story, right? It could be, right? Yeah, it didn't pan out, but look, I found out all these things. There's a terrific story that Wittgenstein, the Austrian philosopher of the last part of the 20th century, Wittgenstein talked about a student, a PhD student in history at Cambridge, who was writing about the influence of X on Y. And he discovered that there was no influence. And Wittgenstein said, you see, that's a great discovery, right? You don't, it can be, right, that it didn't go that way can already be a really interesting fact. Why didn't it? Why didn't it work out? Why didn't it? That's it. Good. So does that help a little bit?
Exactly.
This is me when I write. I only write about things that really excite me, right? And I don't know where they're going to go. And I try to think them out a bit and try to put them together in some kind of story. Sometimes it works out really well. Sometimes it doesn't. That's life, right? Yeah.
I'm not exactly sure how to word my question, so
yeah,
here.
Yeah, just
but,
take a stab at it. Yes.
So, like, something that has been, like, plaguing me throughout this has been, like the very, like, cliche distinction between, like, love and lust, and I feel like we've been talking about the two, like, interchangeably, like, as if they're the same thing. And, like, we talk, obviously, like, about erotic love and sexual love, and, like, I'm just confused because, like, to me, a lot of the things we're talking about seem to be simply lust, but we're calling them love, and so, like, I'm just super confused about that distinction.
Well, so it should be. Yeah, because it's a confused and confusing distinction. In part because it presupposes that we have a pretty good sense of what lust is, and we know that it's not love. But it's not obvious, right? So even saying there is such a thing as lust and there is such a thing as love, right? And never the twain shall meet, or whatever you want to, however you want to tell the story of the two. That's a move in the understanding of it. It's a bit like saying, look, there's eros, right? There's philia, interpersonal friendship. There's agape, the love of God, love for God and God's love for us, or whatever. And this is a way of dividing up the love field, right? Divide and conquer, so to speak, right? And love and lust are another way of domesticating our thoughts about it. So I don't think, at least I wouldn't agree with you, that we haven't said, I don't even think we've barely mentioned the word lust. But I think that sexual love, whatever that is, though it certainly can involve something like that onset of lustful desire, which can initiate it, right, as not as we were talking about it, right, as thought as what initiates it, what grabs it, and then what does it become, right? So I agree that, you could think of lust as a stage, and that might turn into a kind of chrysalis for something that might become love, or it might become nothing, right?
I just feel like we can't get a full picture of what love is, and especially, like, referring back to the essay question, like, without, like, dedicating some time to distinguish it and talk about lust in relation to it, and I feel like, I don't know if we're doing that.
Yeah, well, but that sounds like that's something you think you need to do, right? So you're thinking, I can't get clear about this till I get clear about that. And my thought would be, yeah, well, the first thought would be, well, good luck with that, because I don't think you're going to succeed. But the other one would be to turn it around and think, why is it that I think that I can't think clearly about these until I get clear about that? What is the role? What's running interference on what?
It's not like a first step, second step thing. It's like a side by side thing where it's like talking about them in the same sentence rather than like specifically dedicating time to looking at this and then specifically dedicating time to
but I'm not so sure about the division. So so I would think it would be part of an ideology of love in which you said something like this. Well, there's lust. Are you sure it's not just lust? Well, what if you mean by that a sexual desire, which is what we usually mean by lust, right? So is it just sexual desire? When I hear the just, my antenna go up. Because what I think when you say it's just sexual desire, you make a supposition about the nature of sexual desire that I think is false. As if what excites you or turns you on or arouses your sexual desire is something that is itself something you kind of you can kind of draw a little line around and say you know what that is. I want to say is something like, when you feel sexual desire for someone, just what it is you're feeling can only be diagnosed, as it were, in the emerging story. Maybe that was the beginning of love. Right?
Yeah.
Maybe it wasn't the beginning of love. And that means that, in a sense, it's going to stop. So, but consider a kind of lover. So there's a phase in every romantic or erotic attachment that's called limerence. It's the period in which, maybe like, the other person is kind of at the center of a whole set of interests that you have, and one of them being sexual. Right? And so it's the period of hotness, so to speak, in a relationship, right, where what you really want to do is spend a lot of time lying down together, right? That period. The lifetime of that period, if we study ourselves, is roughly no longer than 3 years. That's on average. In most cases it's shorter, but typically that doesn't last longer. That doesn't mean that relationships end then. It just means that comes to occupy a slightly less central role in them. Right? Now, but there's a kind of person, right? An excitement junkie, right? For whom the limerence period is love. And when that goes, love goes too. That is, for them, what makes love interesting is the erotic desire, limerence, sexual thing. And so they tend to move on to a new lover when the excitement goes. You hear people talk this way, right? Although the sexual stuff just went out of it and then I stopped wanting it anymore. Well, there are lovers like that. That's not, it seems to me, not a kind of love. It's a kind of love of a special sort. Whereas a different kind is where the limerence period is the segue, the prelude to a different relationship in which sex occupies a different role. So that's the way I would go about it. So notice that doesn't totally separate the two. It tells you that erotic desire is one form that a love relationship can take. And then what you want to say about it, I suspect, is not the kind you want. Right? Anyway, so roughly, that's usually when people say lust, love, they're denigrating lust and upgrading love.
Yeah,
I'm
not trying to diminish one rather than the other. I just feel like they need to both be included in the narrative. Not saying that like lust is bad and love is good.
I see. So does the way I kind of sketched the narrative help you a bit with it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the way I want to think. So I think that when we think about our own erotic lives, right, one of the worst things I think we can do is be over-secure about the concepts in terms of which we're going to think about it. And our conceptual resources are usually fairly limited. And they're themselves biased in favor of certain love stories and not others. And one of the reasons to look up really ancient stuff far away from us, right, is that it has different biases. And when you see how these guys sitting around the symposium are articulating the erotic world in terms of their concepts, it shows us something about ourselves. So think, for example, of heteronormativity. What's that when it's at home? Well, it's something like this, that when you tell a love story, right, if it's not about a boy and a girl, it takes on a negative, or, right, there's something suspect about it. If you don't have heteronormativity, then a love story between two boys, two girls, a boy and a girl, three boys and two girls, they're all just equally good love stories. Different one is age bias, right? Where what you think is, when you think of lovers, you think of people who are of a certain age. You think of sex this way. And these are colorings that help, they're the confusions that are, shape our narratives about love. And what we want to do is understand them, right? We want to see how our narratives are being shaped by background ideologies and so forth. That's the thought I have about it. But so I see the reason, but now I'm telling you why I didn't do that. Okay, yeah. Yeah.
I think part of the difficulty is that there are so many different types of love, and
you're sure about that?
Well, yes, I feel pretty sure about that. And different people prioritize them differently.
Yeah, and by different types, you mean, for example, like?
Well, like you said, or I think somewhere in there, like erotic love versus, and I think that versus like platonic love, or not platonic love, but just like love between two people who consider themselves friends. Yeah. And just like even trying to define those categories is difficult enough, but then to like address love. Yeah. And also, I mean, we're only talking about love between people versus like love of a city, love of a book, love of something like that.
Well, not,
and we do address that because we talked about like love of certain objects. And, but I think it's difficult to like be taking a course that's like love and to kind of identify exactly what like within love you're looking at. It's almost like you're trying to look at something like an object, but there's something obscuring the like.
Yeah, but your approach. So you say I don't agree with you. So the first step is already a move. It's not a neutral claim that then articulates a field in a neutral way. It's rather already a move. So when you say there are different types of love, that's not a neutral description of fact. It's already an erotic step. It's already a step into thinking about, it's a bit like stepping in with the love-lust distinction. So when you think there are different types, and then you said, well, there's erotic love, and then there's platonic, as it's usually called. Well, I don't think that's right, but it doesn't make any difference. There's the love between friends. I'm confident those are different. But if, for example, if you were Freud, you wouldn't think those were different. You would think they're the same. You'd think that the love of a friend is erotic love that's aim inhibited. It's just that you're not planning to do certain things with your friend. But the eros is there, and you can suddenly discover that it was there much more saliently than you thought. So think of the following. This certainly happened to me, right? Where, I've been friends with a woman for years, and there's never been any hint of romance. And I would have said we were platonic friends. We were friends, there was no. Then one day, there was. Do you think it just fell out of the sky? Right? Well, no, the thought is, no, it's there. And actually, you can even discover this, right, in other ways, where you're what it is you're doing when you think that you're carving up your life that way and saying, right, I know that this is a friend and not a lover. I know this is a lover and not a friend. I know this is a parent and not a child. I know, and that the loves are all different. I think that those are all moves, and you should be skeptically observant about them. Are those all true? And some of it, I think, is take, for example, the fact that we don't like the idea that a mother's love for her child is sexual, even though it involves a lot of things that, right, are pretty sexual, right? we don't like to think of it that way. And one of the reasons we don't is because we are nervous about attributing sexual desires to small children. And in the same way, when we encounter pedophilia, right, which is not the same as the pederasty we've been talking about in the symposium, when we think of the sexual love that some people have for young children, for children, we get very disturbed about it, right, beyond, right, we even get disturbed by the thought of it. So, for example, it's a crime to have pictures, even if you've never done anything, right? There's a crime to have on your computer pictures of sexualized pictures of children, and just what those are. So I can tell you, one of my friends took pictures of her new baby in the bath, right? And she brought them to some place to be developed, and they refused. They said it was kiddie porn, right? Because you could see genitals, right? Well, it's a strange line, right? So that's what I want to say in response. What I want to do is, that's exactly what I want you to do, though. I want you to say, these are my presuppositions. When I think about it, this is what happens. I think the following 5 thoughts, right, as you thought. It's divided up. When I hear about a course about love, I don't really know what I'm supposed to be thinking about because I want it to be in one of those or 2 of those categories. Now I say, no, I don't agree with that. At least I don't think we should make that presupposition at the get-go. Maybe it's true, but we should try to discover it, not presuppose it. So you can take your own beliefs and try to become a reflective thing. You might end up believing them. You might still believe them. But on the other hand, at the end, you might think that some of them are not as true as you thought. That's the idea. Does that help a bit with your...
Yeah, I guess it's still a little like when you said a love of a friend, when you realize that you actually feel erotic love towards them, I guess I still see that as something of at least like a change in expression of love. So, like expression as opposed to like what it is itself, I think, is hard to differentiate because it's just... Yeah.
So I don't dispute, so you do feel that, I understand it, right? You think, right, not this, that love was incipiently sexual from the beginning, it just was aim inhibited. That's the way Freud would describe it. You want to say, no, it changed and it became a new kind of love. And I think the question is not yet who's right, it's that there are 2 questions.
Well, it's not really like about the expression. That's like what I'm kind of tripped up on is like expression versus the love that is internal, I guess. Like how you exhibit love.
But that seems to, so the difference between our feelings and how we express them, that's going to be true quite generally, right? Whatever sort of view we have about love. So it doesn't, even if we divided it all up and said there were different kinds of ways that these loves could express themselves, there'd still be the issue of what it is, and I think it's a real one, actually, of how it is we express love. So, for example, a key issue or problem in thinking about this is that what we do to express our love may not be taken as an expression of love by the person to whom we direct it. Right? So there's a problem about exchange, which is quite general. So all I'm trying to do with all of you is encourage you to see these things that you're thinking as just the very things that are the topic of the course. The topic of the course is some, not all, of the prejudices or confusions that are brought already to the table, and we want to try to sort them out a little bit to see which ones, if any, we kind of want to hold on to. So that's the thought. See, if you think it couldn't work unless those were as clear from the get-go, then it can't work. Right? That's my thought. Because you can't accept that from the get-go. Does that help a bit? Yeah. Yeah.
I think because we are all beings who inevitably have experienced love in one form or the other, a lot of our class discussion is, although not explicitly, but like driven by personal reflection. And these are far from self-evident discoveries that we're making, but a lot of it is informed by just like thinking about the state of contemporary affairs or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering how welcome those kinds of personal or, I don't know, those insights will be like welcome in the paper.
Oh yeah, of course they are. Yes. What else would you draw on in writing about this if it wasn't your own experience, right? And I think the issue, this should be true. It should be true in ethics too, but it seldom is. This should be true. It should be a risky business writing about any of these things. Why should it be a risky business? Because there's a way in which you're disclosing something. You always are. In every intellectual paper you write, you disclose a lot more than you think. And but on this, you're being asked to, well, not. That's one of the things you're being asked to do is to be willing to write authentically about something that's deeply personal. Right. So, I think one thing that we can discover is we're shallow, trivial people who have actually thought nothing about anything. That's true of our feelings too, right? And you risk that when you write a paper. And just the way every student who sits down and blows off a paper, right, just writes some crap off the top of their head, is revealing something about themselves to a sensitive reader like me, right? So I think, they just blew it off, so I'm not going to bother, right? Why should I put time and energy into something that you clearly could give a damn about? So a different one, though, is that, yes, there is a trust. So part of it is you trust the teacher to pay attention to what you've written and to grade it fairly and all that stuff. But there's another one, right, which is you trust something of yourself to the other person. So you're willing to reveal. And that's always a little delicate. In ethics, people find themselves quite comfortable revealing all kinds of, I mean, pretty terrible things about themselves, right? Because they actually, part of the thought is they don't even think of them as terrible. So they're not, so you can imagine a white supremacist or fascist sitting down to write a thing in ethics and thinking terrible fascist thoughts, right? But actually not feeling any discomfort whatsoever, right? Because they think that's just the truth. They reveal a lot. Well, even when it's not fascism that's on the table, so it's just obviously terrible, it's something a little more innocuous, it can still be very revelatory. So yeah, you do have to do, yeah, I would say, to do it successfully, you would have to do that. But it's not quite the, you have, so you have to draw on your experience, I think. But how vividly you do, is up to you, right? Yeah.
Kind of along those lines,
Yeah.
This is a less funny question than a lot, but I'm just kind of wondering what the difference between a good, okay, and a bad paper are going to be.
That's nearly impossible to articulate.
I mean, like, so specifically, like, in terms of argument, or, like, what you were hoping will...
Almost everything that I could say about this would be such bullshit that you shouldn't listen to it. I can tell you the following. Here's the way I look at it. I've been doing this a long time. I'm very good at it. I'm a good measuring device of how good a paper is. It's like a good, how do I do it? Well, that's very hard to answer. But I think that there are some things, of course, but they're a bit like this, right? Well, write clearly, organize clearly, think clearly, try to be interesting. Right? Here's the only bit of advice that's going to matter, right? It's try to write the paper as if you care about it. As if you care about it and about the person who's going to read it. So it's really how much, are you going to put some of yourself into this, or is this just an academic exercise? If it's just an academic exercise, I'll see that, but that's not the end of the story. You could do an academic exercise very well, and I would think, for an academic exercise, this is pretty good. You might even get a good grade. But it's not really what I would call a good paper. A good paper on this really does take investment of self, because after all, right, we're not talking about the structure of space-time worms, where just what your own feelings are don't matter a hang bang, right? nobody cares what you feel about it, they just want to know what you know about it. But it's impossible in this area to dissociate what you think about it from what you feel about it, right? So you have to be willing to do something like that, yeah.
Along those lines,
Yeah.
because I mean, I
Yeah.
want to care about the paper deeply.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how much flexibility you're able to entertain regarding which films we're looking at.
I'm able to entertain as much flexibility as there is.
So
You should test the level of flexibility. So one person has already said, I don't want to write about those films. He's not here today, I think. But, right, I don't want to write about those films. I want to write about these films. And now, if you'd mentioned 2 films I'd never looked at, I probably would have said no. Not because I wouldn't be willing to look at them, but because it takes a long time to think your way through a film enough to be able to respond to somebody else's thoughts. As it happened, the 2 films are films I know pretty well. So I thought, sure, you can write all those. Yeah. So, you can suggest films that you think would better engage what you want to say than the 2 films I suggested. The reason I picked them is partly because I know them pretty well, but the other is because they pick up on ideas about what love is directed to, and so on, and 2 quite different ways. Yeah. But those are not the only possibilities, and if there are others, you should just ask me, and I'll tell you the truth, which might be, no, I'm not going to look at those, I'm sorry you can't write about them, but might go the other way.
I know we've started sort of moving towards the paper and away from...
No, I mean, I think it's fine.
Yeah. I wanted to say one quick thing about both of y'all's concerns, which is I think that all of us probably have this proclivity to, the conversation starts going towards a particular, granted, it's indicative of the greater picture of love as a whole, but we use imagery and examples, I think, predominantly that are sexual, and that is tempting for all of us probably, and it's easy maybe, and I think one concern would be just sort of an intentionality about going into non-sexual love more than we do.
Well, I'm not inclined to just buy the sexual, non-sexual love. So go back, look at Diotima. Diotima says, well, love for the beautiful starts with the love of a boy. And then it moves to the love of the beauty that are in boys quite generally. Then it moves to the love and the beauty of ways of life and laws. Then it moves to the beauty that there are in scientific theories. So it's not a personal. But it's all the same for her, right? It's the erotic impulse, the desire to give birth in beauty, which is what she diagnoses as the common to animals and humans, right? That's it doesn't lose its genitals as it moves up the thing. It rather gains new ones, right? It's rather that, right, reproducing is taken to be irrational. We've got this, remember in that paper, if you read it, the epithumid genital, right? Our genitals, our generative organs, to keep it, so not just genitals, so that's where genital comes from. Our generative organs are all of the ones we have that are capable of reproducing something. And those turn out to be far more than our testicles. So as a thought, so that's the point, right, in a way. By raising these concerns, you're articulating the very things that make me want to teach a class like this. Why? Well, because, right, when we make these cavalier, as for me, I hear them all as kind of cavalier decisions. Love and lust, erotic love, kinds of love, types of love, all of this, I think, right, that's part of a way of dividing up, domesticating, making ourselves feel secure and safe. Oh, we've got all these, see how much we understand. And I think they're not really reliable. They're themselves attempts to make some kind of sense of something. They're not things that we bring to it and we can't get rid of because they're sort of neutral. No, we could throw all that out. And that's why it's startling to read Plato who starts with the love of sexual love and goes off to philosophy, right? They're all the same. Freud takes that picture too. Many of us reject it. So then the question is, who's right? Not, oh, we're right. That's wrong. That's a question of where should we even get the data to evaluate these two different approaches?
I think the complexity comes in from the sense that, like, there is, I think, a certain amount of, like, prejudice, almost, among all of us, let's say, as people who haven't thought about it as much.
Yeah.
And an awareness of that, for me, would entail, like, still focusing on these generative activities, but in the context of relationships that we all have experience with, such as with friends that we probably will never sleep with, or our parents, or other people like that.
But notice that when you made the move to friends we will never sleep with, as if that is the kind of friends you're not having sex with, you're excluding as sexual activities like talking, having fun together.
Well, in this case, it would be non-physical. I'm not saying that in Plato's...
I think what you mean is your dick is not involved. I mean, really, when it comes down to it, it's really something like that. The thought, because we have we make certain kinds of moves. They're very similar. The thought is, tab A is not going in any slot. This is not sexual. And that is true. That's a way in which... So when Bill Clinton said, I did not have sex with that woman, he was relying on this question. Did you have sex with her? Well, no, I wouldn't say so, because we did A, B, C, and D, all sexual. But tab A didn't go in slot B. Or for many men, it's PIVMO, as the great penile intermission in the vagina with male orgasm. If that's not what you had, you didn't have sex, no matter what else you did. Now notice, that's what we would think of as not just a heteronormative conception of sex, but it's actually a kind of male hegemonic conception of sex. Think if you switched it around. No, we only have sex if the woman has an orgasm. It doesn't matter what else we do. That would mean that a lot fewer people in the world would have sex, right? Right. So I think that you can look at the statistics on female orgasm, rates of female orgasm, and you'll discover that what I'm telling you is true. And to have orgasm through PIVMO is extremely difficult given the location of the clitoris. So, we've got a lot of stuff we learned, right? But all relatively recent. I can tell you the neuroanatomy of the clitoris, that's a big organ. The tip of it is tiny, but the neural networks are that wasn't done until the 60s. And studies of female orgasm, I'm discovering that there was no such thing as a vaginal orgasm. That was all done in my lifetime. So, we're neophytes in this territory, but we should be aware. So that's the sort of thought I have in mind. So when you say, no, we didn't have sex, you're not just doing this. You're not just taking a factual thing, like I didn't give her any money. We know what that means, right? But when we say I didn't have sex with her, what you think it is that you might or might not be having is already something that bears on its outlines all these different factors. How it is that we came to think of it that way rather than some other way. And then what you realize, as Plato does, right, there's a politics involved, that natural science and biology are in, pictures of it are involved. That's what we're trying to discover. We're trying to discover all these aspects of our thought.
Yeah, and a response to Thomas, and maybe this is a the kind of thing that we could do in this class is so my question would be so you put the penetration in the physical, but again we can't take this as preordained or as solid. Like for example, the thing I said a few classes ago about the girl, the village urchin who pays to go to masturbate her. That's not signed as a sexual act. Even though there is the sexual thing of she's grabbing his penis and masturbating for completion, etc. If it doesn't the notion of physical bodies interacting themselves has its basis as penetration within its being signed as such. Because you can't just say oh, because there's this biological. I mean, there's not even a homeostatic melding of the bloodstreams or that kind of thing. Even if that was true, would the structure be able to hold that kind of substantive supposed interaction? And that opens up a really interesting question. If sex is not the physical act of penetration, if the so-called sex can't be held by that, then we're sex.
Well, okay, so
Yeah.
physicality,
I
physicality
don't know.
would be.
Well, I
I
think another one that we'd have a really hard time with is what we think is physical. So, we draw fast and furious distinctions between minds and bodies, psychological, physical, material, all these things, spiritual, right? We pile them all in there as if they're certified. These are good things, these are good concepts in terms of which to think. And so let's just think in terms of different ones. They're not good concepts in terms of which to think. So let me give an example, right? We've come across lots of terms that it's not good to use to think, right? A disparaging term for people of African American descent, nigger, is not a good term in terms of which to think, for all kinds of reasons. First, there aren't any such things in the world. Why? Well, because it presupposes a political hierarchy, which is based on false things, so we shouldn't use them. And the same with a whole set of others that are part of our critique, right? Part of what we've done in consciousness raising and changing the world is to say, don't think that way. Don't use those concepts. Those are bad concepts. And what I'm saying is many of our love-related concepts are bad concepts. Why? Well, they're naive. They presuppose things that we can see fairly quickly are false. They embody an ideology that's harmful, odious, wrong, does harm, right? So there's a whole set of stuff that you want to liberate yourself from. Well, how are you going to do that? Well, part of the thought is, well, you do it this way. So we're consciousness raising. That's another way to look at it. Not just, trying to discover what it is we think or what Plato thought. We're actually trying to raise our own level of engagement in thought by getting rid of a lot of background luggage, just as Socrates makes people give stuff up, right? By criticizing them, by opening them up, we're able to see connections. And so in just the one that you gave, right, I articulated a tiny bit of it. When men talk about having sex, and their way of talking about it has for a long time been the determinative way to think about it, they have in mind one certain kind of thing as the decisive factor. And what we want to think is that's not what sex is. Why? Well, here's why, right? First of all, that embodies a certain kind of power structure that we see no particular reason to validate. Moreover, it has a very narrow notion of what, right? And then we sort of think our way through that, and then we think, okay, so I won't think that way. So when someone says to you, right, after a date or whatever, hey, did you have sex with her? You won't say, right, no, right, because there was no pivotal, right? You'll think other things. And there's a whole set of other factors that are involved, right, about what kinds of things we're willing to do, what things we think are homosexual acts, what things we think aren't, that color or articulate the erotic field for us. And then we enter into it. We already have a whole lot of things. And I want to say, well, it's fine to do that, but let's first make sure that the ones we've got are ones that we're glad to have and should have. Yeah, you had a different thought.
I think it's interesting because I feel like on the individual level, a lot of people want to believe that their love between them and someone else is like different from other people's love.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's that impulse to like say like, well, it's like sex love, or it's it's like different than this other type of love, or it's love between friends. But then they also want to be like, but there's only one type of it, and it's between us, and no one else has experienced it ever.
The thing is, so I could tell you a story about love in which all those things were true, right? So we'd be right on sort of all counts. So one of the thoughts is that, part of what love in general is, so what love for everyone is, it's something particularized to a certain relationship. So for example, it can be this way. You love someone, you fall in love with them, you get married, you have children, right? And then love ends for one reason or another, it doesn't matter. You fall in love with somebody else. And then you say stories like this. it was never love before. It was never like this, right? Right? And right, that's part of a thought you have about love, which is that love is something that's original to this relationship, and that it's not, yeah, I've loved lots of people in all the same way. You feel that that's somehow cheating your present beloved. You want to say, I have feelings for you that I've never had for anyone else. It's like nothing else. That, though, turns out to be a general fact about the way we tell our love stories. So one of the thoughts is, are we right? And the answer is, in part, probably yes. Why? Well, think of it this way, right? Each person brings out slightly different aspects of you. Aspects of yourself and of them are realized in a relationship in a way that wasn't so in the other one. Is one better than the other? Well, we have an inclination to want to say, at last, true love at last, right? And that tells us something not about the nature of what it is, but of the kind of commitment we want to make, the kind of expression we want to give to our... but let me just tell you one more thing about this, right? Think of this. Your beloved is... You're going out together, you're doing something you really like together. So you've been together for a while. And your lover looks in your eyes and says, God, you're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. Now, here's something that's true. That's false. You know it's false, right? Right? Unless you're very lucky. And you are the most beautiful woman he's ever seen. Either that or he hasn't seen too many women. Whatever it is, right? But you know it's false. That is a huge part of what we do when we're in love is we lie. Right? And yet we're not lying. Right? We're not lying. It's not like this. I don't think you're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen, but I'm going to tell you this. No. There's a way in which you simultaneously mean it and would recognize its falsity if challenged. Because then what you do next is you say, to me, you're the most beautiful. Oh, it's a lot weaker, right? But nonetheless, what that tells us is something. So here's a little biological story. My goodness. Precocious. I'm just curious. I want to see what you're reading. But anyway, here's the thing, right? We do tell these stories, and here's a biological theory about why we do. Right? It goes like this. When you hear your mate tell you this story, you think, he's crazy. How lucky I am to find a crazy person who thinks I'm the most beautiful person in the world. I should hold on to this one, right? Because I happen to have come across the one person who actually thinks this about me. Notice, you might think this is crazy, but actually it's not. Think about another one where Nixon pretended to be crazy. Because then it would go like this, right? He wanted to make sure that there wasn't going to be an exchange of nuclear weapons. And he thought, if they think I'm crazy enough to push the button, that'll act as a deterrent. So if I were rational, of course I wouldn't push the button, because mutually assured destruction, that's nuts. Right? But sometimes it's very useful to be non-rational. Right? Because then the other party can't rely on your rationality in a way that gives them an advantage. It's another example altogether. There's a craziness pill. If you take it for 24 hours, you're utterly unreliable as a rational person. You're just crazy. So a guy comes and holds up his gun and says, "Okay, give me the code to the safe, or I'll kill you." And you say, "Threats don't work anymore now, right? Because threats only work. Shoot me, I don't care, right? That's no good." So that's just to give you a clue that when we want to think about our sexual lives and see them as part of the animal kingdom, like the blue-footed boobies, right, we get a level of insight into them that's quite different than we would get from the outside. So I'll give you one more example of this, I think is fascinating. Why do we laugh? you haven't been clear. Right? So well, we laugh at things that are funny, but why do we laugh at things that are funny? Why do we laugh? Here's an evolutionary theory. It's very good for us to have reactions to things that are very difficult to fake. Why? Because when we can't fake something, the other person treats it as genuine, right? Because anything we can fake becomes deviant data, right? Similar, right? So but laughter, genuine laughter, is one of the hardest things to fake. Try it. You see how difficult it is for it to make a real. So laughter that's one of the reasons why senses of humor and shared senses of humor turn out to be important to us, right? So that's an insight we get. There are some other great ones, and for example, why do business deals usually get sealed over dinner with a lot to drink? And they do. And one reason for that is that when people get drunk, they lower their inhibitions. And when they lower their inhibitions, you think you see better than you do when they're guarded. So people drink, they drink together to see what each other is like when their inhibitions are lowered. And that again becomes very important to testing whether or not these people are going to be good partners. So anyway, when you think this way, right, about our sexual responsivity and the fact that we say extravagant things, you realize that there can be ways of, illuminating these that are quite different from any we might have expected. That's another reason to think that as we don't typically see our own erotic lives as like the erotic lives of animals, we think they're quite different, right? One of the ways being that, we think, as you were saying, right, we think ours are individualized in a way that theirs are not. We might be wrong about even the animals. I could tell you lots of animal stories, but I'll lose those. Bugs give each other love gifts. They even wrap them up. Isn't that cute? They're not the kinds of love gifts you'd like to get.
Like a really nice
crumb. Here's you'd like this little grub. Yeah, exactly. Yum. Yeah. Okay. So, okay. That was good, wasn't it, to talk about this? Okay. So now what I want to do is just tell you where we're going to go. Okay. And again, you're free to redirect, take over, challenge. Right. We're going to finish up on the symposium quickly, and we're going to talk about the Phaedrus, and we're going to talk about you just read it. It's not that long. It's weird, but you'll know a lot more about it. Doesn't think it's weird. She's been indoctrinated for too long. You read the Phaedrus. You'll see that part of it will be very familiar to you about the kinds of lovers and how it's related to the kinds of soul. Some of it will be different. It'll be about rhetoric and the structure of love stories and about what a scientific, quote, rhetoric would look like at the end. Just read it through. Try to keep your mind turned on while you're doing it, but don't worry too much about getting lost in the details. Just try to get a picture